So, this is the first Netfor currently unnamed podcast where we have brought in David Cady, our CTO, to talk a little bit about IVRs and IVAs and the reasons behind why they're failing, what's coming in the future, and just general backstory of the CTO's role, what you do, how you do it, and how you're pushing Netfor forward. So I'll let you have the floor. Tell me a little bit about you and Netfor. I know me and you started working together, cubicles next to each other, about 5 or 6 years ago, back pre-COVID, and I mean, it was a fun time. We've grown a lot, we've changed a lot. So tell me about where you started and where you're at now.
Thanks, Ian. It's great to be here. I appreciate the invitation. So I've been with Netfor about 5.5 years now, almost 6 years. I started just as the senior analyst. When I started here, we really didn't have a very mature BI department. So my first role here was setting up the BI department. From there, I grew into being the BI manager and then the director of data operations. And then with the advent of AI, I sort of took the lead role in introducing Netfor into AI and how it's used back in 2022-ish, which led to my current role as CTO, where I mostly design our AI products that marketing can then take to the market and solve real issues.
That's the goal.
Yep. And the main focus so far has been, for a little bit of backstory, I spent my first career as a broker for Charles Schwab. And we worked in a call center environment. And I probably, without exaggerating, answered a couple 100,000 phone calls during my career. So I built a lot of soft skills doing that, which when I moved into the tech side of things was a little bit unusual. Most people who come up through the tech industry, we can say they lack some soft skills, we can call it that, and be generous. So I came into the tech industry already having those soft skills built, and then I just built the tech knowledge on top of it, which gave me a certain advantage. But also, I understand IVRs extremely well. I was around back in the mid-90s in the call center when they were first being introduced. I understood that kind of from the get-go, they operated on a premise that your callers know what they want, and your callers are prepared to answer questions like account numbers and things like that. They presumed a certain level of caller in order to work correctly. And occasionally they did. Occasionally people would call in and they would have all the documents ready and they would have all the questions ready and they could navigate the IVR properly and it would help them. But most callers I found over the years don't operate within those bounds, right?
And that's a lot of assumptions to make about callers being ready at the go.
But if you think about it from an engineering perspective, you kind of have to start from somewhere, right?
Yeah,
so the obvious thing to start with is they're going to know why they're calling. But if you've ever worked in a call center, you learn pretty quickly that they absolutely don't.
Yeah.
Or at least they don't know the specific area they need to be talking to, or they don't know the specific question that they should be asking. Especially when you get around to things like insurance products or equities or things like that.
Yeah.
Even something as simple as, Comcast famously has a terrible IVR. And I happen to know a bunch of people that work at Comcast, and I've talked to them in the past, and I've always wanted them to do this experiment where they just get rid of their IVRs. Just have people answer the phones from the get-go, something along the lines of a classical receptionist, right? Train them which departments people need to go to, train them how to answer some very entry-level questions. And the cost of operating those humans may be higher than the cost of operating the IVR. Yeah. But my thesis is, in the end, you're going to end up saving money because you get so much less rerouting of phone calls, so much less. You can train those frontline individuals to answer some very simple questions. What are your hours of operations? What's your address? Things like that. And you can save your call center agents for the more complicated and the more nuanced questions. Right. When ChatGPT came along, I realized that we could actually implement this experiment because now we have the ability to scale, right? I don't need to necessarily hire hundreds of employees to run that receptionist operation. I can train an AI to do it, and I can get a lot of success out of it. So now we have the opportunity of taking these ideas that I've had for the last 30 years and actually implementing them at scale and getting the best of both worlds, where we have the front line isn't press 1 for this or scream operator until you're blue in the face and maybe something good will happen. The front line is a natural conversation, so it's a good customer experience, but you still get the benefits of having that automation.
Yeah. Yeah, the intake is something that's always lacked within IVR spaces, like you just said, pressing 1 or screaming just to talk to somebody. Yes. Even when you get on the phone and it's just, it automatically, you can tell what the experience is going to be like. I think something you mentioned was the cost savings. I think the cost savings will also come from a increase in customer experience, because I can confidently say I have left a unnamed internet service provider because of their customer experience and how horrible it is to go through those hoops. It's off. And you're right. Sometimes I don't know what I need. I'm just trying to fix something. I don't know what the issue is. All I know is internet's down, call this number, and then I have to go through hoops or phone trees, or I'm Googling Reddit and trying to find a real customer service line instead of just the one they throw on the box.
Yep. Yeah, and when you train a whole industry that when you hear IVR, just start immediately pressing 0 or saying representative or pressing 1. You kind of have it. That's not a failure mode, right? That's like, it's systemic. You are basically you're not getting any of the benefit that you are hoping to get out of implementing this kind of automation, and you are negatively affecting everything else around it. But I don't know. My personal opinion is we go back to a lot of the people that design these systems have never worked in call centers. They don't have the soft skills necessary to understand how a conversation should flow from a good customer experience standpoint.
Yeah, I think that's huge, and I think that's a big differentiator for you, since you've taken those 100,000 calls and know exactly what to expect. Is there any positive things about an IVR anymore?
I mean, no.
Cheap?
Not even necessarily cheap. Okay. I happen to know that an unnamed internet service provider pays about $35 million a year for their IVR contract. I happen to know the company that builds the IVR for them. Goodness. So it's not necessarily cheap. Now, is it cheaper than deploying however many humans it would require? Yeah. Probably, but that is, there's an opportunity cost to that that I think most companies aren't willing to recognize. I can't imagine anybody within ISP leadership not understanding that people despise their IVR.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's never risen to the level of, oh my gosh, we have to do something to fix this.
And now with AI, I think it's coming down the pipe. IVR's time to shine is do something now, because they're about to get cut.
No, I don't really see. I think in a couple of years, once there are still some rough edges to AI and ML. You know, how you deploy it makes all the difference in the world. We take a lot of care and effort in guardrails and making sure that we have very tight controls over what the AI can and cannot do.
Yeah, that's important.
Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of products in the market that don't do that. And so every time you read one of these stories about, some random AI suggesting adding glue to your pizza to keep the cheese on. I don't know if you read about that one, but
that would be considered a hallucination.
Yeah, it makes my job so much harder though, because AI naturally does occasionally hallucinate.
Yes.
But a lot of the hallucinations that people run into in production, if I was to deploy an IVA, there's generally some kind of knowledge base that you're going to point that IVA at. And if your knowledge base is some share drive that has no management over it, of course the IVA is going to hallucinate in the exact same way that if you hired me and said somewhere in this share drive is your answer, there's a good chance I'm going to pull up an old document or the incorrect document. It doesn't really matter how smart I am as a person. You can hire the smartest person in the world, but you wouldn't just throw them into your business and be like, have fun. You would put structure around them. And that same kind of structure is what these AI products are lacking right now. A lot of these products that are on the market don't have that what would be referred to as the correct harness. They're not being guardrailed correctly. They're not being shown what to do. when they can't answer a question. So you want to prevent them from just making a question up.
Right. And I think I've seen that in my GPT and Claude experience. I'll just say, you don't need to answer me. If you don't know the answer, you can just say you don't know. You don't need to make something up or just best guess it. I would much rather have no answer than a totally made up wrong answer or glue on pizza. That doesn't sound fun.
Yeah. And then, there's tons of those examples out there that we can learn from. And it's so fascinating to me that, in the 70s, we started building all these frameworks around how technology is supposed to be built.
Yes.
Right? It's supposed to be QA'd, and it's supposed to meet these standards, and it's supposed to do this, and it's supposed to do that. And then AI came along, and we just, as an industry, got amnesia. We were just like, just throw it out there. It's fine. I'm sure it'll work great. We didn't do any testing of it. We didn't do any QA of it. We just started throwing things against the wall, hoping that magically it would work. And then when it didn't, we were like, gosh, I don't understand why it didn't work. I mean, Uber spent, hundreds of millions of dollars testing their product before they released it out onto the market. And they did that because it's a very complicated product.
Do you think there's a lot of companies out there that are just prematurely launching
100%.
a bunch? Like, what do you think the ratio is? Like 95% just jumping the gun?
I don't know necessarily. I think that ratio is coming down recently. I think people are starting to understand that it's not an autonomous worker. It will never be an autonomous worker.
No, and that's
the point of it is not to try to be an autonomous worker. No. It's an exceptionally good worker. It's very scalable. It can do what it's told pretty well most of the time. I think as long as you structure it in the same way that you would a live human agent, you give it, feedback, you give it the proper structure. I think most people would find that the AI errs somewhere in the same neighborhood as a human would. Every human on earth is going to make a mistake on occasion. Out of those several 100,000 phone calls I took, I guarantee you I made a few mistakes, right? So the AI would be on that same level if we treated it properly, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I don't think expecting perfect results from anything AI or human is ever the correct path forward. And I know we wrote a blog a few years ago, and I think it was regarding SLA compliance, and we're like, why every SLA can't be 100%? It's because we're acknowledging nobody's perfect, never has been, never will be. And I think that goes into a part of Netfor that may be different. Is we've been doing this for a while. We've got people like you who know the skills, know the environment, know everything there is to know about taking a call, what's required of it. That's why we can build in SLAs that are really accurate and have good first call resolution rates because of our knowledge base, which is another big point that I wanted to bring up is knowledge bases in AI. Give me like a general, like how is AI influencing the knowledge base of companies and being able to surface questions or answers sooner when people call in, customers call in, they have a repeat or new edge case that they want to answer. Yeah.
So I think what the main lesson that the market is learning right now is that your knowledge needs to have a life cycle management applied to it. Everything from creation to using that knowledge to retiring that knowledge, there's a very specific life cycle that it would go through. And for 30 some odd years, that's kind of how Netfor has operated as a company. We've always built knowledge articles for virtually everything. We have a knowledge article for every possible question that our agents can answer.
And article for knowledge article?
Yes, we have a knowledge article for what to do if you get dead air on a phone call. I mean, we have knowledge articles for everything. Even we have knowledge articles on what to do when you can't find the correct knowledge article.
But you can find that knowledge article.
Yes.
It's kind of like a tongue twister knowledge article.
So what we realize, though, is that if we take those same life cycle management and apply it to, for anybody in your audience that's not familiar, there's a term called RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation.
Yes.
And you can think of that as when you're talking to ChatGPT, I kind of insert myself between you and ChatGPT. And I take your question and I attach to that question some kind of knowledge article. And then when I pass it on to ChatGPT, I say, please answer this question using this knowledge article. And so we have a way to refine the knowledge that the AI can use to answer your questions. And by doing this, we can insert things like company level knowledge or very specific answers or verbatim wordage or all kinds of neat things like that. Mm-hmm. What we are doing though is we're taking our lifecycle management practice that we've had for 30 years, and we are applying that same concept to the retrieval augmented generation that we're building.
Say that again, just slower for me.
Retrieval augmented generation. So
lost me on all three of those words, man.
So we are. Let me think of the best way to explain this. We are augmenting. We are changing the retrieval of information from the LLM.
Okay. That makes sense. So it's changing where it's grabbing information from. It could be grabbing information from the internet or from a knowledge article or from an attached document.
Well, typically, if you don't give it any context whatsoever, the only context it can use is whatever its training data is. Okay. Right. So if you can imagine an LLM trained on Reddit, you're probably not going to want to just ask it random questions, right? You're going to want to try to be very specific about the questions you ask it so that it uses the correct training data to answer those questions. Well, we don't know what its training data is, right? We don't know what any of these LLM training data is. So what we can do is we can say, for instance, if you have a point of sale and we know the model number of the point of sale, and you call in and you say, hey, it's this point of sale is down, we can look up a knowledge article for that specific point of sale and say, follow these steps to determine why it went down and to fix whatever the issue is.
Interesting.
So if I didn't have that knowledge article to give to the LLM, it might be able to answer that question correctly based on its training data. But what you're basically doing is hoping that somewhere in its training data, it got exposed to this very specific point of sale, which probably didn't happen. Okay. So we have a way of basically teaching the LLM. If you can think about it this way, the way I first described this to my boss was, it's like every time somebody asks it a question, we pause time and quickly train the LLM on how to be a Netfor agent, and then we unpause time and let it answer that question. So every single time a question, and now this process happens in milliseconds, but every time somebody asks it a question, we basically give it a quick training update. Here's a knowledge article, learn this, and then answer that question.
Cool. I think I understand at a very high level what it does. But that's interesting. So that's a lot of information.
Yeah, and you can do this on your own too, though. Think about maybe you were you recently graduated college not that long ago.
Recently, that was like 6 years ago. I don't know if that,
compared to me. So you were assigned some chemistry document and you just flat out don't understand it, right? Correct. You're just not grasping it.
Common theme.
A very common thing nowadays that students would do is simply drop that document into Claude or GPT or whatever you want to use and say, please explain this document to me. Mm-hmm. This is the exact same thing. Really, this is the exact same thing. The order of operations is a little bit different, but we're doing basically that. We're taking a knowledge article and we're giving it to an LLM, and then we're saying, please answer questions based on this article.
Okay, that makes sense. So that brings me to another good one. So what happens if the workflow is in one point of the workflow is totally broken? You have an IVA or an IVR, you have broken knowledge, but you want to band-aid it with AI. Is that even possible? Or
absolutely, you
really
can. Yeah. So they're kind of high level. The concept is called failing gracefully. So, if you don't do anything and you ask an LLM a question and it has no idea what you're talking about, it's literally just going to make things up. Okay. Just whatever sounds good in the moment. And you'll never get the same answer twice. It will every time make up something brand new. And even if you tell it, hey, that's not correct, it'll go, oh, sorry, and then it'll make up new stuff. It'll become like a never-ending cycle. So, what you want to do is you want to have what's called guardrails. Mm-hmm. So they're traditionally right now in the market, what we're using is called post-generation guardrails. So what that would mean is you ask GPT a question, it answers that question, and before I show you its answer, I look at it and I go, no, that's wrong, and I send it back. Or I look at it and go, hey, man, don't swear at this guy, and I send it back. I can put guardrails on what is allowed to happen. And then if I ever reject a message, I can just substitute it with a different message, something along the lines of, I'm sorry, I don't have the proper knowledge to answer that question. Let me get you it over to a human and they can answer that question for you. So putting in those guardrails, there's also some ways of doing pre-generation guardrails, which we're exploring here at Netfor that we found to be extremely successful in helping reduce hallucinations.
Yeah.
And that is the key word there, is reduce. Mathematically speaking, MIT, I think a year ago, proved that just mathematically, you cannot ever get rid of hallucinations. They will always exist. It's in order to eliminate them entirely, essentially, you would have to have an infinite amount of knowledge in a finite amount of space. And just logically, you can't do that. You can't always eliminate hallucinations. But with proper pre and post generation guardrails, you can drastically reduce them, and hopefully, in all cases, you can catch them before they're exposed to the user.
Okay. A lot of information.
Yeah, the thing that fascinates me about this whole industry is, even prior to 2023, when ChatGPT came out, I knew about this industry and I played around with LLMs, and it was very difficult to interact with the LLM. There was basically a command line that you had to know what to type, and then getting the retrieval of the generation was always a pain. What ChatGPT did, their innovation wasn't creating LLMs. It was creating this interface by which we can interact with the LLM. That was their huge thing that they did. So when they came out with that, though, from that moment, I kind of knew that it was a watershed moment. I also was alive when the internet first became a thing.
I think I was too.
And
when did it come out?
It would be, technically, I think in the late 80s, but it didn't really hit popularity until the early to the mid 90s.
Okay.
But I was born in the 70s, so I think that it was pretty easy to recognize early on that this LLM thing was just as impactful as the internet was.
Yeah, that's what everybody's saying. It's like the second coming of
it
the
is.
internet.
It absolutely is. And I think in the end, it will be more impactful than the internet was. Yeah. I think the only analogous relationship I can think of was the Industrial Revolution, where we automated manual labor.
Yeah.
This AI revolution, we are automating thinking labor, and there's really, after that, there's really nothing left to automate, so to speak. So this is going to be the last one of these revolutions that we're going to see for a long time.
Now, do you think it's going to, AI and all these other things surrounding it, do you think they're going to come for people's jobs, or do you think it's going to make people's jobs easier? I know it's a split divide between people thinking it's going to take over the world and nobody's going to have a job, or it's going to make everybody's job a lot easier and a lot more productive. I personally think it makes my life a lot more productive. My job, I can do things quicker than I was able to do. I was able to replace certain workflows because now I can just automate it, put it aside, leave it for a 10-minute thing to do instead of a 10-hour thing to do. It changes the game, but I want to get your input on where you think it's going.
I think, yesterday I had a coding thing that I had to do. I had to write a script that normally would have taken me about a half hour, and instead I got it done in about 30 seconds with Claude. So I am the first one to recognize that the scale of this thing is beyond anything that we can really prepare for yet. Whether or not it will replace people's jobs, I don't
want to fearmonger people here.
The products that we are building aren't designed to do that. Yeah. They're designed to enhance people's ability, like you said, to allow them to be more efficient, to allow them to address the things that require a human brain rather than the repetitive things that happen again and again and again. Those repetitive things are where we are targeting AI.
Yeah.
AI is not ready to do a lot of different things.
Right.
If I ever called a hospital and I was, I don't know, I wouldn't want to call a psychologist and go through psychotherapy with an AI. Let's just put it that way, right? You have to have.
It's going to start making things up again.
Yeah, I mean, it's nowhere near that, and I don't really foresee a time. The basic technology by which an LLM operates, at the very deep level, there's these things called transformers. And this basic transformer technology, in my opinion, precludes the possibility of AGI.
What's AGI?
AGI is general intelligence, artificial general intelligence. So it is like human level AI. Foundationally, these transformers, it doesn't matter how nifty we get with the math. In the end, it's still just math.
Yeah.
You know, in the end, all we are doing is running a very long, complicated calculation and showing the results of that calculation. So we can do things that mimic reasoning, but we can't not actually reason.
Yeah.
You know, if it doesn't have the proper context, it can't even mimic reasoning. You know, whereas a human can take their whole life worth of context into account. And even when presented with a situation that they've never encountered before, they can use their past experiences to inform how they react to that situation. Yeah. AI is never going to get there, not with the current level of technology that we are at. Now, having said that, there are just so many use cases of, you know, intake for an IVR is such a good example, in my opinion.
Is that considered an IVA at that point?
It is, yeah.
Okay, so an IVA replaces the IVR with smarter intelligence and smarter intake.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because you're solving a problem. If your AI is not solving an actual problem, then you're using it incorrectly.
Yeah.
You know, I can think of tons of examples of, you know, famously Meta just announced a couple of days ago that they were shutting down the metaverse. They spent like $80 billion. You don't even know what it is.
Is that the VR thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
They spent $80 billion on it, and your face just now told me you don't even know what it is. That's how unsuccessful of a product this was. Dang. And the entire reason it was unsuccessful was because there was no problem that it was solving.
It was just a thing that existed.
It was just for no reason. There's no point of it, you know. And so that translates into really everything we should be doing with AI. If you're not solving an actual real world problem with it, then you shouldn't be using it. The problem that we are solving is the IVR stage, right? The intake stage. We are not saying that everything that happens after that is also solved by this same product, right? Because everything that happens after that is more nuanced. It's harder. We're not there yet with this technology.
That's usually handed off to an agent right now.
Yeah, absolutely. As it should be, right? Yeah. But the things like, what are your hours of operation? You know, where do I send my bill to? Or how do I, you know, what's your website address?
There's like tier 0 calls.
Yes,
where it's
exactly.
Like so repetitive, and it's just information.
Yes.
Okay.
So now you have the ability to remove all of those and let your human agents focus on the more nuanced, the more emotionally nuanced or technically nuanced questions.
Yeah, which is what they want to do. I don't think people want to answer the phone and go through 95 password resets. I think they want to be challenged.
Yes, absolutely.
I think they want to deal with maybe even new edge cases that come across and things that AI will just gladly hand off because it doesn't have a clue what they're getting into because we've set up guardrails to not let it solve that problem if it doesn't know what's going on.
Yes. Yes, having it, you know, intrinsically, the way the market played out was we built these LLMs to really want to be helpful, right? And which is, on one hand, it's a good thing, but on the other hand, it does create the scenario by which when it can't answer a question, it will just it will not tell you I don't know if you don't tell it to do that.
Yeah. Now, good intake from an IVA standpoint, I think right now its best use case. I could be wrong here. I'm unknowledgeable in IVA space at the moment, but the intake it can I think it can save callers about 30 seconds just by currently accepting the call immediately, answering prompting questions like what's your name, where are you calling from, who the client is, getting 30 seconds of information, and then handing off to an agent who now has a handoff packet, we'll call it, of information of why they're calling, who they are, and if this person at this store and this computer has called before. So I think that saves a lot of time, and I think 30 seconds saved over 5,000 calls a month. I don't know that math, but that seems like a lot of minutes. 2,500 minutes.
And I would say, you know, realistically, you could be looking at far more than 30 seconds. You could be looking more at like 2 minutes. You know, if you think about, you know, just the can I have your name, your email address, your phone number, your account number, some kind of the identifying information that you have to do. Then you, on the back end, you're looking that up against some database to see if they do have access or if they've called before or whatever. And then asking them those questions. Why are you calling? Determining whether or not they are calling for a reason that the IVA can address. Is this one of those tier 0 issues that they can just knock out and let the caller get on with their life? And then the key part that you mentioned was the handoff packet. When it does need to go to an agent, when it needs to escalate to a human, everything that was said and everything that was done needs to be transferred along with that. And then at the same time, there's no reason why you can't be looking up the proper knowledge article to answer these questions.
Or AI pulls it up for you on your end, the back end. It can just have it ready to go so you can speak to it.
Yes. And you can certainly go as far as, while the agent is on the phone with the caller, you can be listening to that conversation and you can be suggesting certain things that they should be saying. Or, you can be giving them notice that, hey, the sentiment on this call is changing negative against you.
That's real-time interaction guidance that we've implemented.
Yeah. And, as long as those things are handled, you don't want it to just be noise for your agent. Right. It has to be useful.
Solve a problem.
Yes. Again, it has to solve a problem.
Yeah.
But as long as you are doing that, I could think of lots of times where even back in the early 2000s, whenever I had to answer a question, I had to find the answer. And the way the company that I worked for allowed me to search those was very different from one company to another. In some instances, you're just expected to know it and memorize it from having either been told it or read it at some point in time. And then sometimes companies would go as far as producing something like a wiki for you to have access to that you can look the questions up on. Yeah. This is the same kind of thing. We are just literally scaling it with LLM. Yeah. We are just allowing the agent to use the LLM to try to do the things they would be doing anyway, but just faster and easier.
Yeah. That brings me to another good point that we're seeing through a lot of retailers and franchisors that are clients of ours is prioritization and escalations. I know we get a lot of calls because they have department stores. They've got thousands of stores nationwide. Yeah. Something that could be a revenue blocking issue, something like a cash register broken or something. I don't know the exact use cases, but something like that is way more important than somebody that just has a password reset. Yeah. So AI can prioritize and escalate to a human way quicker if that case is deemed via the IVR a important revenue blocking issue.
Yeah. So with IVRs, they attempted to do this with something called intelligent routing, right? That became a fad maybe in the last decade-ish. Where they were, instead of having to press one, you could say one. And so they brought in this text-to-speech stuff. Yeah. And then they thought, well, maybe we could use this text-to-speech stuff to help get the routing correct and reduce some of the misroutes that happen. It never really took off because, again, here you're just routing a problem. You're not solving a problem. And with IVAs, you have the opportunity to actually solve the problem.
Yeah. That's
with the priority thing, not all calls are the same, right? So if I'm calling in and I need to order more light bulbs, that's one issue. But if I'm calling in and my store is on fire, that's a completely different issue, right?
Yes, and it should be escalated maybe a little differently.
Right. So, but the queue that we're going to is just one queue. So how do you handle that? So with the LLMs, with the advent of these, that we're able to understand the context much better. So we can just have a conversation with the caller. Hey, is what your problem is preventing you from making a sale right now? And if they say yes, then we immediately say, okay, well, we're going to shut up and we're going to get you to the next available person. Yeah. And you're going to go to the front of that line. Mm-hmm. We can't always say we're going to immediately put you in touch with a person because there is still going to be a queue, but you are literally, it doesn't matter how many, if there was 200 people waiting in queue, you're moved to the front.
Yeah.
And that has been entirely successful. And that is not something that, if you gave an IVR option, press star if you're not able to make a sale, what's going to happen? In a week,
everybody's going to
press star, right? You're just going to train them to press star, and then if everybody's an emergency, then nothing's an emergency, right? So by being able to understand the context and asking them questions and having them answer those questions, we're able to actually pull off something like intelligent routing.
And that's solving a huge problem.
Yes, absolutely.
That's awesome. So people are trying to implement this.
Yeah,
through
100%.
their own companies, people like you, CTOs, IT leaders. Where do you think they're getting their wires crossed, and what do you think, if you could give them advice, what would it be on implementing things like this to help with scalability, routing, immediate answering, customer experience, where do you think there's a failure, and where do you think there's an opportunity for them to?
The very, very first thing I would tell anybody is do not try to do it on your own. Absolutely not. It's
Not even if they're really smart and took 100,000 calls before at Charles Schwab?
Matter. We've worked with a lot of partners to develop our solutions over the years. We have actual empirical evidence that when you are trying to implement AI, especially for the first time within your corporation, doing it on your own versus doing it with a partner who has done it before, you're going to get a lot more success. Something like 4 times the success when you work with a partner. There's been multiple studies that have shown this. I don't want to sound harsh or controversial, but all of us have dealt with or talked to or worked in an IT department that was just an absolute catastrophe.
Yeah.
Very siloed, very little documentation.
No knowledge base.
There was
sticky notes.
That one engineer that always wears the hoodie with the hood up, and he runs everything. And if he left your company, everything blows up, right?
Yes.
We've all dealt with those kinds of IT departments. So now we want to take a brand new technology that's far more complicated than anything they've ever done before, and we want to let those same exact people try to deploy it. And it's just not, it's not going to go well. You need somebody who has been in the trenches, who knows what to expect. If you didn't know going in that guardrails were a thing or how to implement guardrails, you might end up with a solution that lacks guardrails. And that's how you get...
It's dangerous.
Yes, that's how you get all of these products that are on the market right now that just aren't inherently good products because...
Rushed?
Yeah, very rushed.
Really?
They didn't... nobody's an expert on everything. You can't be an expert on everything. Yeah. So you want to bring in people who know what they're talking about. You want to listen to those people.
How do we separate the noise from fiction and fact? If somebody's got a large marketing budget and they've got the loudest voice in the room, I mean, how do you differentiate from what that person's saying to somebody like us? That's just starting off on a 2-person podcast for the first time.
I've started using this term called demoware is what it is, right? And so there's a lot of products on the market right now, and I've personally used and seen many of them where when we ask for a demo of their product, they can put together something that looks really, really, really good. And everybody knows the story of the first iPhone demo that Steve Jobs did. He didn't have just one iPhone. He had like 12. And he would switch one out because each iPhone could do one thing correctly.
Oh.
There was no single iPhone.
I've never heard of that.
Oh, yeah. The very first demo that he ever did, he had a podium. And in that podium, I don't know the exact number, but there was a bunch of iPhones because each one of them was set up to do a very specific function correctly.
Wow.
There was no single iPhone that could do all of them. So this is a very similar type situation where these demos are being built and they're being brought to me and they look very shiny and they look really good. And then when I try to productize them or put them into production, they fail at the slightest touch, right? Because there's what happens in a controlled demo environment versus what happens in production is 2 totally different things. And
so if you're seeing red flags, too good to be true right up front with the demo, and then you get into the onboarding and starting to like hallucinate, or it's starting to break at the slightest touch. I mean, that's a huge red flag that maybe some companies like that could brush off and say, oh, it's new. It's the first year of AI. We're still developing some things, working out some kinks or whatever. But you think those are still just...
When I've asked, I'm not going to name a vendor, but I had a vendor where I was like, why is this not working the way that you guys demoed? And their answer was, well, it's really hard.
Okay.
And I was just like, yes, that's not really the answer I was looking for there.
No, that's an immediate DQ for me there, partner.
Yeah. And it is really hard. I won't doubt the fact that it is really hard. But don't claim you can do it. But right. Don't, the marketing fluff is worse than I've ever seen it ever. Every company on that has an AI product says that they've solved all the problems and everything else. I think the proof is in the pudding. If you can talk to other people who have used that solution, that's very helpful. If you're considering an AI vendor and you have a project that you want them to complete, talk to somebody else that has had a completed project from that vendor. That will tell you very, very quickly whether or not they can actually walk the walk.
Yeah. Yeah, that does a great job of answering that question. So, do you have
And
any?
then
Any
your
other?
knowledge base is the last thing. You absolutely cannot just turn AI loose in your environment. It is not an autonomous worker. Please don't try to treat it like an autonomous worker.
Yeah.
I think I wrote an article once where the example I gave was, if I was able to hire Einstein, it doesn't matter if I hire the absolute best person at that job on the planet, they're perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still not just going to turn them loose in my environment and be like, all right, I'm going to go on golf for a while. Please don't mess up. You're still going to train them on how to operate within your company. Mm-hmm. You're still going to check on them occasionally and see if they're doing a good job. You're going to give them reviews. You're going to incentivize them to act a particular way because that's how your company culture wants it to be. There's all of these things that we have developed around. I hesitate to use a word like employee maintenance, but it's the structure around employees by which we want them to operate, because we have found that is how the business operates most efficiently. We found that that's how we give the best customer experience. We have found that that's how we achieve our results in the best way. Yeah. And so we incentivize and train our employees to act in those ways. You cannot expect AI to do its job well without treating them the exact same way.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other parting notes before we
No,
close it out?
I'm very excited about the future. I think that this industry, it's growing so fast and things are changing so much. Every time I look at this industry, it's different.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to keep up on all the new exciting things, but
I know. But if we can solve the IVR problem
yeah.
with intelligent IVAs, good intake, good routing, I mean, I think that's a pretty big problem we can solve for a lot of people out there.
Yeah, and on a final note about, it replacing employees.
Oh yeah, no.
It doesn't have to.
No.
There's no reason why it has to. There's nothing inherently about this technology that says, it has to be a negative for everyone. It can be a positive for everyone. Mm-hmm. It just has to be, we have to have the right goals and the right incentives.
Yeah. So defining goals and incentives should be something maybe besides looking at reviews of AI companies claiming to do things, maybe people and leaders that are bringing AI to their company could do what you just said.
Yeah. If you're not solving a problem, you shouldn't be using AI.
Boom. So we'll leave it on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you
for coming in.
It's been great. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. We'll talk to you soon.
Awesome.